They say depression is a lot like drowning, because no one can hear you scream. Depression was a lot like that for me. There were times when I wanted to scream for help, but I was scared that if I did, my lungs would just fill up with water. And there were other times where I didn't want to scream for help, because I thought that if I just kept trying, if I just kept swimming, then I could somehow get my head above water again. I thought that I didn't need a lifeguard to jump in the water to save me, because I thought I could save myself.
My name is Maggie, and I have depression, or major depressive disorder to be fancy, with severe social anxiety disorder. Depression is not just a fancy term for sad. It is a real and scary disease caused by a chemical imbalance of serotonin levels inside the brain. Social anxiety is not just a fancy term for afraid of people. It is a disorder in which normal social interactions cause an abnormal amount of stress for the individual. So, what exactly is depression? It's a feeling of emptiness, of needing and wanting to cry, but not being able to, because you just have this feeling inside you of being empty, of feeling nothing. It's an inability to be positive, or at least it's very difficult to be positive in basically every situation. It's seeing the glass half empty. Depression is feeling tired a lot of the time. It's being able to sleep for 10 hours, but then waking up still tired. It's feeling lonely. So incredibly lonely that nothing can fix, not even being around people who love you. It's the kind of lonely that makes you feel empty, makes you feel hopeless. It's being so frustrated all the time because what's going on in your head doesn't make sense. And you can't explain it to other people, and you can't make them understand, which is even more frustrating. Depression is one giant paradox. It's feelings constantly juxtaposing each other. For example, like, you want people to ask you what's wrong. You want to talk about it. But then as soon as somebody asks you what's wrong, you shut down. Because you don't want to talk about it. Because it's too hard. By admitting something's wrong, you're admitting you have a problem. And it's hard to admit you have a problem. It's hard to admit you're sad. It's hard to admit that sadness is your problem. It's a sadness so heavy that you don't know what to do with yourself, and sometimes you think that you're not going to make it through it. It's so heavy that sometimes you have to shut your eyes and, I don't know, just put your hands in your head and just pray that it goes away. But it doesn't. It just sits there. And sits there and sits there. And, I don't know, it's the kind of sadness that sometimes even turns into anger. You know, being angry at the world for not turning out the way you want it to. Being angry at your life for not going right. But mostly it's being so angry at yourself for everything. It's blaming yourself for everything. Just because it's easier. Because you can't point the finger at other people. Because ultimately you feel it's your fault. You feel it's always your fault. Depression is constant self-hatred. It's looking in the mirror and hating what you see. Depression is wanting the sadness and the pain to just go away. Because it hurts. It hurts so much. And it's not the kind of hurt that you can see. you know, it would make sense if you had a bleeding leg, but you can't see this hurt, and you just want it to stop. But at the same time, it's not wanting the sadness to go away because the sadness is comfortable. It's being afraid of being happy because that happiness can be taken from you. That happiness can just go away really easily. And at least, you know, the sadness is something you're just used to, something that you think is always going to be there. It's constant negative self-talk. It's always putting yourself down, you know, despite being told otherwise. It's hard not to fall back on quotes about depression, especially when you're trying to make sense of it yourself. You know, you want it to be in your own words. But I also read this quote once that said something along the lines of, you know, it's not really your body that's tired so much as your soul or your emotions. And I think that's partially true because, you know, I get tired very easily, and I think it's just from I don't know, putting on a show for people, for pretending to be happy even when I'm not, for, you know, faking smiles. It's not, you know, being physically tired, it's being emotionally tired. I always turn to sleep because, you know, when I'm asleep, I don't have to feel anything. I don't have to feel pain. It's escaping reality. Depression makes me have awful thoughts. Makes me want to die. Makes me tell myself that the world would be better off without me. That everyone in my life would be better off without me. That I'm just a burden to everyone. That, you know, without me, they wouldn't have to worry anymore. I wouldn't be holding them back. It makes me tell myself that people don't care about me and they never will. It makes me convince myself that people hate me, that I'm a burden, that I'm a mistake, and that I don't matter. Every day I look in the mirror, or almost every day at least, you know, I hate what I see. I look at myself and think, you know, who would ever love you? Depression makes me tell myself that I'm nothing, despite being told the contrary to every negative thing I tell myself. It's very, very hard for me to believe them, and it's even harder to see myself in a positive light. I found this picture, and it's pretty much the perfect embodiment of who I was as a kid, I think. You know, I was always smiling, always happy, and I owe that to my parents. And I'm very, very fortunate to have two married parents who love each other very much. And they always made sure that my sister, my brothers, and I were happy. They always tried to give us everything we wanted. They always tried their best, you know, to make us happy. And that's why it's so hard for me to understand where everything went wrong. Every once in a while, you're gonna get somebody who says, well, like, what are you so depressed about? Why are you so depressed? Or what do you have to be depressed about? And there's not a simple answer to that question. In grammar school, I think I was a friendly kid. You know, I always had, for, the first 4 years of grammar school, first 5 years really, a best friend. Always had somebody to hang out with. Like I said, I was friendly. And then 6th grade hit, middle school. And I think, that was kind of the point where I started really caring about what people thought about me. I wasn't carefree anymore. I started really feeling like I didn't fit in. I started to become really sensitive. I started to feel everything a little too much and got offended way too easily. More so than other people my age seemed to. They seemed to, handle criticism, stupid 12-year-old insults better than I was able to. Feeling sensitive all the time continued into high school, and things, constantly bothered me, or I was bothered by the smallest of issues. Nobody could probably tell that it bothered me, just because I was succeeding academically. I was succeeding in cross country. I was the star cross country runner, #1 on the team. Nobody could probably tell that anything was wrong. People think that a person who gets good grades, who is athletic, who has a great family, who has the opportunity to go to an incredible school, they think that, well, that person's definitely happy. They have no reason to be upset. But in my mind, I had every reason to be upset, because I was so hurt and sad and felt so lonely. Junior year was, I think, the first time that suicide crossed my mind. And I thought that, just killing myself would make everything better. It would make my problems go away. I had a plan. And when I couldn't go through with that plan, I thought that made me a coward. I thought that made me weak. I wanted to end my life so badly. And when I couldn't do it, I felt like a failure. On the inside, I was hurting a lot. And in hindsight, I know now that's what they call high-functioning depression. It's the kind of depression that's not noticeable, because I wasn't, visibly displaying any symptoms, at least not in front of people. When I was by myself, I cried a lot. Cried all the time. Senior year, I continued to isolate myself from the good friends I had on the team. Isolated myself so badly that by the end of senior year, I threw out my graduation cap in the air by myself. Senior year was supposed to be the best high school year of my life, and it wasn't. Prom wasn't. Graduation wasn't. So for college, instead of staying at home for school, I decided to go away to Marquette University. I had also committed to run for Marquette on their cross-country and track teams. Despite having fun with my new college friends, I found myself still isolating. I cried all the time because of how much I missed home. I used to, tell my mom all the time how much I just wanted to come home, because home was safe, home was comfortable, and college wasn't. College was scary and uncomfortable. Even though my freshman year had been hard, I decided to return for sophomore year. By the time I finally decided to see a counselor at the counseling center, I had been on medication for maybe a month or two. I thought medication would be enough. I thought they were happy pills and could just magically make me happier. I don't think my college friends knew anything was going on. I didn't tell them I was taking medication. I didn't tell them I was going to the counseling center. I kept it a secret because I was afraid of how they would react. I was afraid that, they wouldn't want to hang out with me. I was afraid that they would reject me. I was afraid that they would look at me as the sad girl, the depressed girl. And I didn't want to be that girl. So the summer after my sophomore year, I decided to live in Milwaukee. And I was still on the team. So I was supposed to be training that summer. But I spent a lot of that summer just sleeping to escape. I know this doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to me. So why should it make sense to other people? I had college friends. I had friends. So why was I feeling so sad? Why was I feeling so lonely? I wish I could answer that question for you. Junior year rolled around and cross country just went awful. Each race didn't get better. And I, finally decided at the end of the season that I was done. That it wasn't fair to the team, that I was barely trying. It wasn't fair to the coach that I was barely trying, even though he had invested so much time and energy and money in supplying me with shoes and gear and advice. It wasn't fair to him, and it wasn't fair to the team who I was supposed to be dedicated to. The people on the team were my friends, and I still wanted to be around them and see them, so I talked to the coach, and he agreed to let me be the manager, which basically just meant that, I would do their laundry. I got to drive this big van that said Marquette Athletics on the side, so I would drive them around to practices and stuff. So I was still able to be around them. But still, my days were filled with plastered-on smiles in front of my friends, followed by fits of crying about how alone and useless I felt once I was by myself. So despite being on consistent antidepressant medications since July 2014 and weekly therapy sessions since August 2015, despite having loving and supportive family and friends, an amazing education, and so many opportunities to laugh and have fun, My days were devoid of happiness that would last longer than a few hours. My depressive symptoms continued, and about a month before my 21st birthday, they had arguably reached their peak. My social anxiety had increased tremendously to the point where I dreaded doing simple things. Going to the grocery store or walking to class were extremely difficult for me because I didn't want people to see me. I sat in the back of all my classes, and each day I silently hoped that I wouldn't be called on. I hated leaving my apartment, my safe place, and I wished I could be invisible. My depressive thoughts, on the other hand, were similar to the ones I had been having since high school, except they too had noticeably worsened. On most days, suicide was all I could think about because these depressive and anxious thoughts were so incredibly suffocating. I felt physically and emotionally exhausted and was so sick and tired of everything. I was hurting too much to want to continue living. On February 15th, 2016, I made the hardest decision of my life thus far, which was to medically withdraw from all my classes for the rest of the spring semester. Later that day, after a long conversation with my therapist and many calls to make the arrangements, my parents dropped me off at a hospital in southwestern Wisconsin. This psychiatric hospital was it was the light at the end of the tunnel for me. I thought that going there was going to change everything, that it was going to make everything better. Because I had hit rock bottom. The month following my discharge, I wrote a website called 10 Things I Learned as an Inpatient at a Psychiatric Hospital, just to kind of speak to people about my experiences and teach them about the things that I had learned, in hopes that, they would learn something and come to understand mental illnesses a little more. I talked about how I used to think of antidepressants as happy pills, and I held the hospital to the same standard. I thought that it was magically going to make everything better, when in reality it only made things better for a short period of time before I started feeling the same again. Even though I was still seeing a therapist and taking my medications, it just, things weren't getting better. I was kind of lost and really confused, even more confused than before. Because I medically withdrew, I had to prove that I was ready to come back. My therapist had to fill out this questionnaire. I had to write a letter speaking to why I was ready to come back. And it wasn't until I think a couple weeks before classes were going to start that I, got the okay that I could come back to Marquette. So I, signed up for classes late, but I was still able to get into all the ones that I wanted. But that semester was hard, and, I felt the same that I had junior year when I withdrew. Despite, still being the cross-country team manager and being around my friends, I was unhappy. I decided that after I completed fall semester, I was going to leave Marquette and come back home to Chicago for good. I enrolled at St. Xavier University, a half mile from my house. It was a big change. I dyed my hair. I got a new job. So, all these big changes in my life that I thought, were gonna make my life better and make everything different. They did make everything different. And yes, they are improving my life, but I still find myself struggling with the same things that I was struggling with last semester at Marquette. I'm still going to therapy and seeing a therapist. I'm still going to the psychiatrist. So why aren't I getting better? I came home to feel better. So why isn't it working? You know, this just goes along with how depression makes me so frustrated all the time. And I'm so frustrated all the time because it seems like no matter what I do, you know, even if I feel happy for a short period of time, it goes away. And these awful feelings of loneliness and hopelessness, like feeling like I'm in despair, they come back. Like, are they always going to keep coming back? Are they ever going to go away? Am I ever going to get better? And the answer is yes. Things are going to get better. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but eventually things are going to get better. I have to believe that things are going to get better. I have to believe it. Because hope is possible.